Hi, my name is James Purser, and this is Purser Explores the World, a show where I ask people questions about topics that I'm interested in, and I hope that you are too. This is episode 1, which I have entitled Numbats in Space. And for today's episode, we're going to be having a look at the Australian space community. Now, I've always been a bit of a space nut. Even when I was a kid, I had a telescope and I was sitting out in the backyard looking at the stars and the moon and wishing that I could be out there. So I thought for the first episode, I'd have a look at what's happening here in Australia. Now, Australia has had a spotted relationship with space exploration. The early 60s saw Australia become the 7th country to launch its own satellite and only the 3rd to have done so from its own territory. We also became heavily involved with the European space effort, providing the Woomera rocket range for the European Launcher Development Organisation, which was a precursor to the European Space Agency. And probably our most famous space effort came with the Apollo moon missions. The CSIRO radio telescope facility at Parkes, which was famously portrayed as in the movie The Dish, formed a key part of the global radio network that relayed communications between Houston and the Apollo missions, being the first terrestrial location to receive audio and video of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walking on the moon. However, since then, government support for space exploration and research in Australia basically hit the floor. And until recently, that's where it stayed. Smaller organisations, private organisations and universities have struggled along as best they can, and they're doing some pretty funky work, but there hasn't really been any guiding light from the government or any real support. That is, until the Space Policy Unit was set up within the Department of Innovation. So for this episode, I'm going to be talking to 3 people. I'm going to be talking to Marco Ostini from the small group known as Lunar Numbat, which is a group of hardware hackers and open source hackers who are working with the international group called White Label Space, which is taking part in the Google Lunar X Prize competition. We'll hear a bit more about the Lunar X Prize while we talk to Marco. Then we'll be speaking to Michelle Clement, who is from the aforementioned Space Policy Unit. We'll be going through what they were set up for, what they've been doing, and what sort of future plans that they have. And finally, we're going to have some hard science. Well, not so much hard science, but there's some really funky work being done in Australian universities in terms of space exploration. And this example will be Professor Christine Charles. She's the head of the Space Plasma Power and Propulsion Laboratory at the Australian National University in Canberra. And we're going to be talking about the new type of plasma drive that they've developed, and hopefully will be launching in sometime in 2013 on its first test run. Okay, let's get straight into it. Here's Marco Ostini, and I'm going to let him start off by telling us how he started Lunar Numbat.
I started a group on Facebook called Australia Needs a Space Agency Already, and started to get people to join it and tell people about our dire state of affairs with regards to a complete lack of a space program. And why it matters to ordinary Australians. And through that group, I got to know a guy called Andrew Barton, who was aware of the Google Lunar X Prize, which was just kicking off, and I was also aware of it at the time. And we were both discussing what it meant, what it could potentially be the kind of inspiration for. Anyway, Andrew is an expat Australian. He lives in the Netherlands. He has to, because he actually does work in space science, and it would be impossible for him to do what he does for a living in Australia because there's no industry for him to do it in. And just as a throwaway line, that's like a $2.5 billion industry that Australia could be involved in, money that we could be bringing into Australia, but we choose not to. So Andrew works in Europe, and we got to talking about the whole thing, and I had this crazy idea that I would somehow start a Google Lunar X Prize team and get him to join it. And thankfully, sanity prevailed, and he did it instead, and I agreed to support him. That was definitely the much more sensible approach, given that he actually did do it for a living and I was just really annoyed about the lack of Australian space science. Um, and so the goal of the Google Lunar X Prize, and because it's an X Prize, it follows in a series of X Prizes which have existed, and the most notable one is the Ansari X Prize, which led to make a long
That'd
story
be the
short.
first commercial space shot, really. The first manned commercial space shot.
Exactly. And the gist of that prize was to put a person into space, so not in orbit, I need to stress, but in space over the Kármán line, which is approximately 100k up. Put a person in space, bring them back safely, and then do it again within a fortnight. And they did that. And it was thanks to Burt Rutan's scale composites and a very ingenious design, although, without going into all the background of it, it's ingenious because they made it work, but it's a design that von Braun had, in the 40s. This is a classic old German design that they had when the Germans were serious about space science and
well, when they were serious about the V2 rocket.
No. It actually predates the V2. The V2 is actually just a necessity. Von Braun didn't really want to have to work on it, but those are the guys paying his checks, his bills, I should say. But the Ansari X Prize will hopefully lead to Virgin Galactic being a going concern and a viable commercial entity, and they're in the final stages of testing the booster and the space-going vehicle. It's in two parts, so everything's completely reusable. And so the Google Lunar X Prize, which is the next prize in the series, if you like, is to put a rover safely on the moon, for it to travel half a kilometre or more, but at least half a kilometre, and to send back high-definition video and still images back to Earth. It also includes a mooncast, which would have to be live, but that can be live in a lower resolution. But it is highly desirable to record that mooncast in high def, which you then send back later after the live broadcast. And all of it's to be commercially funded. Only a very small proportion of it is allowed to have any government funding whatsoever. So it's got to be a commercially going concern. So it's putting a rover on the moon. It's got to be basically, paid for by commercial and or private commitment. And to the average person, that sounds like complete nonsense. It sounds like the most crazy thing they've ever heard. Until you suggest to them that a Formula One team would have a sufficient budget to do it several times. It's actually not outside the bounds of reality in any shape or form. And the team that Andrew formed, which is called White Label Space, the leader of that team is a chap called Steve Allen. And Andrew is the chief engineer. So it made sense for a group to support them in their endeavors and, to try and get them some technologies that they can use along the way. And that's how Lunar Numbat formed. So Lunar Numbat formed as an intention in my mind prior to going to the Linux conference in Hobart in 2009. And I was a bit frustrated still, of course, with the state of space science in Australia. And so I gave a lightning talk at the end of the conference and got a little bit of interest. And from there, the group formed. And to my perpetual gratitude, John Oxer was very interested, and Andrew Gelmy. And that also led to a bunch of other guys getting involved from the open source community. And since then, we've been trying to focus on a few things that we can actually deliver. So the open source technologies that we're currently trying to work on are propulsion control avionics. So that's avionics to actually control to control the throttle of an engine so as to allow the flight control on the vehicle to send commands to the avionics, and the avionics turns those commands into real actions relative to the throttle. we're working on trying to send high definition video and still images over very low bandwidth using attributes from JPEG 2000, and combined with that, attempting to use I guess a peer-to-peer style network connection, and we have been working on radar altimeter as well. The purpose of the
Yeah,
radar.
because when
Yep.
I saw your talk at Hobart, and I saw your John's presentation at LCA 2010, I think it was.
Yeah, in Wellington. Yep.
Yeah, and one of the problems you were trying to deal with was how to work out where the ground was when your lander is actually approaching the moon. That's what the radar altimeter is going to be about.
Yes, exactly. So a lot of it can be just worked out in math, and that'll get you close enough. But as you actually get closer to the surface of the moon, you really need to decelerate, and you really need to know exactly how far away you are. And so the radar altimeter works. It's based actually on a combination of a radar altimeter that the Indian Space Agency used relatively recently, about a year and a half ago, is my guess, maybe 2 years ago, with their Chandrayaan mission. And there's a chap who also builds an open radar altimeter for use with gliders in Europe, and we're deriving plenty of useful information from him. So we're using a combination of those two technologies to try and make one which can be used for this mission. And yeah, it's rather important. So it has to essentially just bounce a radar wave against the moon, get a response, and work out exactly how far away it is, and more importantly, or as importantly, also its velocity. And now, combined with that, a new development that we're working on is also an actual engine, an actual bipropellant engine itself. And the engine we're working on at the moment will use a combination of kerosene, which in rocket language is called RP1, and nitrous oxide. And the nice thing about this engine is that it actually needs to be both bipropellant and monopropellant. And the reason why that's important is that as you approach the moon at a serious velocity, you need to start decelerating in a pretty serious manner. So you need lots of thrust. But the trick is to make the whole lander efficient, you need an engine that can run in a range from providing a huge amount of thrust to a very gentle amount of thrust just before you actually touch down on the moon. And by having an engine that does both bipropellant so that it's generating a good thumping amount of thrust as it needs to decelerate as it approaches the moon, right down to a nice little gentle amount of thrust as it's just a couple of meters above the surface of the moon, that will be, an incredibly helpful technology for the lander itself. So what we're working on at the moment is the beginning of that engine, and then it's going to inform the work that the white label space guys are doing. So it won't be exactly the engine that'll be used. I mean, all the technologies we're working on will not be, the final version. The first version won't be the final version that goes to the moon, but all of them are actually informing the technologies that will go to the moon.
So it's more of a testing and development role.
Sure,
it's production.
It's both. It's the beta version. How does that sound? Using a good old IT jargon. It's the beta, or you might even call it the alpha if you want.
All right. So the X Prize is, when are they due to? What's the time limit?
So the time limit is now 2015 for the full prize, and the prize is $30 million. And then for each year after, I think for 2 years the prize diminishes, and then after that there's no prize at all. So yeah, not very long between now and that's
Is anybody close enough? Close? Do you think anybody's going to grab it?
Yes. There are actually about 3 teams in particular, I think, are doing quite well. All of them are, struggling with various challenges. I'm pretty confident, actually, at least one team will do it. I'd like to see much more than one do it, to be honest. because I think that would help enormously. The part of the problem of um, part of the reason why the X Prize Foundation have this prize in the first place is to break this misconception in people's minds that all of this is impossible, that the moon is this impossible distance away, we can never get to it. My Subaru wagon's done the distance.
If you're interested in helping out the Lunar Numbat team or finding out more about what they do, you can hop along to lunarnumbat.org. That's LUNARNUMBAT.org. And Marco would love to have your help. All right, next up we're going to be speaking to Michelle Clement. Now, she's from the Space Policy Unit, and they're taking the thing about the Space Policy Unit is they're taking a bit more of a low-key, toes in the water approach to things, I think. So we're not going to have a space agency anytime soon, but it's a first step.
The unit came in, it was introduced in the federal budget of 2009-10, and it set up the Space Policy Unit to be the central point of contact and coordination for all of the government's civil space activities. And at the same time, it also gave us $40 million funding for the Australian Space Research Program, which was a competitive grants program aimed at demonstrating Australia's space research capabilities and innovation. So we got a good kickstart. We came into effect on the 1st of July 2009, and we've been busily working away ever since.
Okay, well, what would you say? I mean, that's a pretty broad sort of mission statement, your civilian, the Australian civilian space effort. But what would you say is the what are your focus points at the moment?
I guess the focus at the moment is, other than the Australian Space Research Program, which is really aimed at, demonstrating Australia's core capabilities and encouraging or developing skills in that within the Australian space sector. We're writing a national space policy for Australia, and that's to really, provide a vision for what Australia views space related technologies are going to be. It'll identify that we're going to have a particular focus on Earth observation, satellite communication and position navigation and timing applications, which I guess are the real key space applications that we use a lot of and we're very good at. We have really good data analysis and are able to turn around the data that comes from space and to use it in a range of different ways, from our weather prediction services to monitoring of natural disasters to mapping and resource management, those sort of things. And so it's actually, articulating that the Australian government recognises the important part that space plays in the overall sort of national innovation system, our national security systems, and the wider government as a whole.
All right. Now, from a layman's point, from my point of view, you really do seem to have a terrestrial focus for a lot of what you're doing. You're talking about weather systems. I'm assuming you're talking about security systems, tracking borders, border security and stuff like that.
That's correct.
Will there be in the future? Will there be maybe a move to more the best way to say it is extraterrestrial sort of areas?
At this stage, we don't have any plans to go into things like manned space flight or anything like that. We are really going to stick more closely aligned with our, the workhorse applications of using information from space and the GPS and all of that. But we do support some niche technologies through our grant projects. We have invested in things like some propulsion, scramjet propulsion technology aimed at looking at, assisting launches into space, and plasma thrusters technology as well. So we're doing a small amount of that, and we're also being involved in some missions that are being organised through NASA and JPL, such as the fourth or upcoming GRACE follow-on mission. Again, that has relationships to climate change and Earth observation, but we're providing some technology, like a laser technology that will be on the spacecraft that NASA launch on those. So, and that measures gravity waves and things like that, which then, measure sea level rises and a range of different things which are then used for modelling of climate change variables.
Now, in your work at the unit, how have you been received by the other groups in Australia, such as the unis or the smaller private organisations?
We've been received quite positively. It's I guess one of the the main things is there was this a lot of excitement about when we came into place, because it indicated the Australian government had sort of a renewed interest in space and that we were taking it seriously, and we continue to do that, and that's why we're developing, I guess, the national space policy to I guess start to drive the direction of where the government wants to go with its space interests. We're also looking at trying to assist some of our small businesses in accessing some of the bigger global supply chains. So some of the big US-based aerospace companies, by showcasing some of the technologies our small medium-sized enterprises have, so that they can then link in and start becoming part of that global supply industry within the space sector. So there's some of the ways that we're trying to support them. Most of our industry and the universities were all eligible for grants under the Australian Space Research Program. Admittedly, it was quite a competitive process, so not everybody got a grant. We only awarded 14 before we exhausted our funding. But those that have received that are really developing some really good technologies, and that is flowing on to other parts of the sector. So it is, I would say, we've had a really favourable response within the sector.
Very nice. Now, looking forward, say 5 years down the track, what do you hope that the unit will be able to produce?
Well, I guess between now and the next 5 years, I can guarantee we're going to have a satellite capability in space, and that's primarily initially through the introduction of the 2 Ka satellites through the National Broadband Network. One of the roles of the unit is we're in charge of the Space Activities Act, which is a bit of a regulation about Australians launching anything into space, or an Australian craft being launched into space, and so we will be supporting the launch of those satellites once they're finished being built and are ready to go.
Will they be launched from Australian soil?
Not from Australian soil, no. We don't have launch capability in Australia, so that will come as part of, I guess, the procurement activity in securing those satellites. Those decisions will be made. That hasn't been made this time.
You've got a national space plan which you guys are working on. When's that due out?
Well, we're hoping probably I think it'll be a staged approach. We'll probably release a bit of a framework to start off with, so then we can explore, some of the challenges and issues that we have coming up. But I hope to have something out to the public within the next couple of months, actually.
Oh, very nice.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Just to end on a personal note, do you have a personal interest in space?
Yes, I must say yes, I do. If you'd asked me that before I started working in here, I said, well, as a child I used to lay out on the back lawn and, watch the stars, and was always excited when I saw a satellite fly by. And, so I guess I did have some interest from my childhood. And then when I took on the role, I developed a greater understanding and appreciation of it. Space just covers so many sectors. You've got those application areas, but then you've got the space science area, which is all a bit different again. And then you have what we call the defence and national security side of space as well. And so it's a really diverse, very interesting area to work in. And, I've really enjoyed my time working in space, and will continue to do so in the foreseeable future.
Well, thank you very much to Michelle for taking the time out to talk to me. Now, so that's a space policy unit. It's the first time that the federal government has had any sort of dedicated office for space research and development. They're going to be starting small, and we'll have to just keep supporting them and hope that they grow bigger, and maybe one day Australia will have its own space agency. Okay, next up we're going to be speaking to Professor Christine Charles. Now, I'll have to say a very big thank you to Professor Charles because she took the time out to speak to me only 2 hours before she was meant to get on a plane, because she was heading to Europe. Now, we're going to pick up the conversation as we're talking about a potential launch date, or what would be needed to get a potential launch date for their new plasma drive. Now, this is very funky stuff.
Yes, so the aim is, or we're working towards possible launch in 2013. That would be the earliest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not decided. We are still looking at various opportunities, but before that we have to do all of the development and space qualify the thruster. So you may have heard that we recently got a big grant from the Australian Space Research Program of the government.
Mm-hmm.
That's in collaboration with EADS Astrium in Europe and VIPAC in Australia, and also the Surrey Space Centre in the UK. So we have various consortium members, and so the aim is to now develop a prototype and space qualified in Australia. And so to do that, you need first to develop the second generation prototype. We already have the first generation, which we tested at the European Space Agency in about 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to develop the new one, and we also need to test it in space conditions. So to do that, you need some infrastructure. So the grant also aims at making this infrastructure available in Australia. And so it will be located in Canberra on the Mount Stromlo campus of the
very cool.
Australian National University. So you remember there was a big fire there in 2003?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So they have their new big center, astronomy, astrophysics, and also space. So, and they have the space, and so that's where it will be located.
How long have you been working on this project?
How long? Well, the actual discovery in the lab that occurred, did that mid-1999. So that's about 12 years ago. So that's in our research lab, which is called the Space Plasma Power and Propulsion Laboratory at the Australian National University.
Yep.
And so that's located on the main campus within the Research School of Physics and Engineering. So that was, 12 years ago. And, so a few years after that, we kind of, we got approached by, on a slightly different topic, we got approached by them with their Vazmir rocket. I don't know if you've heard about astronaut Franklin Changias, but he's developed a plasma rocket which is called Vazmir. And so his rocket has got 3 acceleration stages, and the first acceleration stage is called the Helicon technology, which was born at the ANU, which was invented by Professor Rod Boswell a long time ago. That's, 20 or 30 years ago. And so they use that technology, and since we have expertise, they asked if we could help them with their rocket, which we did. So that was the start of the collaboration with NASA, but it was to help them. And so when we were doing that, we kind of realized that we already had some very interesting results, which had not really, I tried to advertise for them at a few local conferences, but it didn't really work out. No one was kind of interested or believing in that. So after that, we thought, okay, well, let's concentrate on this, because we actually already have some pretty good results. So we lodged a provisional patent. Not sure exactly when that was, but that was 2002, mid-2002. So it already took 3 years to get to that point. And then immediately after that, there's a 6-month delay. So we waited, and we decided to publish the results so that everyone would know about it. And so we published in 2003. We started publishing in 2003, and it took a few years to convince the scientific community that the results were correct, and so, but it took off then. It took a while, but other people tried to do the same thing, and they saw that the effect was real, and so it basically took off then. And in 2003, 2004, we got a small grant from the government. It was Cooperative Research Center for Satellite Systems in collaboration with CSRO and with the European Space Agency. And so that's when we developed the first prototype, and we went to the European Space Agency to the development and test center at ESTEC in Holland. And we had 1 month there, which is not a long time. And we took the first prototype with us, and we did the first tests. So we were pretty happy with that. And then we took the prototype back here in Australia. And decided to start trying to find the funding to do small tests here in a space environment. So we started with a very small chamber, which we have on the main campus, which is what we're using at the moment. And that's a first step. But of course, you have to prove to the international community that the space qualification needs to occur under certain conditions. You need to simulate space. You need a big chamber and with big pumps to evacuate
You want a complete vacuum.
Yeah, and it needs to be big, and you need to have a huge pumping speed, like orders of magnitude higher than what we have at the moment. So that when you fire the thruster, when you eject the plasma, it really thinks that it's going into space and nothing comes back into the thruster.
So with the thruster, you're looking at hopefully a test launch in 2013.
Yeah. So we're doing a development that will be next 2 years, and in parallel, of course, we are trying to find flight opportunities. So we're talking to the we have the expertise on the thruster and the plasma physics and the physics behind it, so it's called the Helicon double layer thruster. But they really have the expertise in the spacecraft integration and how you go about, bidding for having your technology on a spacecraft. So there are a few possibilities. There's one which is called, I don't know, I'm not really sure about the latest information, but there's one which is called the ESMO student project. So it's the European Space Agency says that it will launch, I think it's 2013. It will launch a small satellite or spacecraft with which will be organized by students from various organizations. So we're trying to see if we could have an opportunity there, and we're just looking around at the moment. And of course, it will depend on the results, and the preliminary results are very good, so I'm quite optimistic. And then it's convincing people and finding the money because there's always a bit of a risk when you have a new technology on board. It has to be a scientific experiment first. You can't just
whack it on a cargo ship and let it go.
Well, you can, but the chance of it not working is high.
I don't know. So, the Soyuz are having enough trouble at the moment staying in the air. They could do something with this.
Yeah, but with the other technology, it really took decades to get it to work. So we have to be realistic. Of course, we do the best we can, but at the moment we have limited resources. But if someone comes up and says, "Look, I don't care about the risk. I take your technology, I put it on my spacecraft, and if it gets destroyed, I would go for that because it doesn't matter. I think it would be a fantastic scientific experiment."
Okay, pie in the sky stuff. Knock on wood, everything goes well. You test and prove your technology, and the plasma thruster becomes a viable tool for space exploration. Where would you like to see it being used?
Well, okay, I would love it if it could be used for two types of missions. The first one is that you may have heard that there's a lot of junk in space at the moment. A lot of satellites in orbit, and people are not very good. Often they don't really destroy them properly at the end of their lifetime, and it's not good. So I think there will be some regulation down the track where you have to take your rubbish somewhere and deal with it.
Yep.
And so that's called putting. So at the end of the satellite life, you have to put it on a graveyard orbit or burn it, like bring it down so that it burns when it enters the atmosphere or whatever.
Yep.
So. And you have a lot of time to do that, typically up to 25 years. So it's not that you have to do it in 5 minutes. And so this thruster would be perfectly suited for that because you don't need much propellant, but you need a lot of time. And if you have enough power from your solar panels, which you have at the end of the satellite lifetime, because the panels are still there, and if you could use the residues of the bipropellant systems, which usually are already there, but it's just not enough. There's kind of not enough pressure. So we have shown that you can use all sorts of propellants. So you could use the residues to slowly bring your satellite onto a graveyard orbit and dispose of it properly. So I think that would be a nice niche for it. And the second one, of course, is much more ambitious, so that's more long-term. It's for deep space missions. So with that, we're trying to evaluate all the different possibilities. So we have to show that you can scale it up or down in geometry or power without having any major, problem with the thruster, which other thrusters can't really do at the moment. Over 5 kilowatts, they become unstable and things break down. And also you have to try and think if it would be possible to refuel while you're going into space, so that you don't have to take all your propellant from Earth, because that'll
be the old ram scoop idea, wouldn't it?
Well, towards that goal, the first step that we've done is we've shown that it works with carbon dioxide, which is a large, which the main component of Mars and Venus atmosphere. So if you really dream really hard, you can think that in the future it might be possible to get your fuel as you go. Of course, there are a lot of technological challenges, but it might be possible that you don't have to take everything with you, or at least that you could try and, if you take stuff with you, you should be able to really
replenish it.
Yeah, replenish it, or at least use what you have like really effectively to the last drop.
So once again, thank you to Professor Christine Charles for taking the time out in her busy packing period just before she got on the plane. Well, there we have it, folks. That's the first episode of Purser Explores the World. I hope it's been informative. I know it probably sounds a bit rough, and it's been a long time since I've been sat behind a microphone, so I've probably made a couple of mistakes. But bear with us, I will be getting better. The next episode, which should be coming out in a fortnight, is going to be called Super DIY. And I'm still looking for people to talk to who are working on do-it-yourself projects that you wouldn't find on the block or any other TV renovation program. So let me know, and thank you to everybody who took part. This has been an Angry Beanie production. Thank you.